My name is Emma Richardson, and at 28, I thought I knew my family. What I discovered on my wedding day changed everything I believed about the people who raised me. While they were busy destroying the most important day of my life, they had no idea that my beloved grandfather had left me something that would turn their world upside down. But before I tell you how justice was served from a tropical paradise, let me know in the comments if you've ever had to choose between family loyalty and your own happiness. Trust me, what happened next will leave you speechless. Growing up as the granddaughter of William Richardson meant living between two completely different worlds. On one side was my grandfather, a man of quiet dignity and genuine wealth who preferred fishing trips to fancy galas. On the other side were my parents, Robert and Patricia Richardson, along with my older sister Victoria, who seemed to worship at the altar of social status and material excess. The contrast became clear early in my life. While my parents threw elaborate parties in their mansion and Victoria paraded through high school in designer everything, Grandpa William lived in a cozy cabin by the mountains. Despite owning a successful chain of hardware stores and having substantial investments, he chose simplicity over show. "Money is just paper, Emma," he would tell me during our hiking trips in the Rockies. "It's what you build with your character that lasts forever." Those weekends at the mountain cabin became my refuge, the place where I learned that happiness didn't come with a price tag. By the time I graduated college and started working as a veterinarian at 24, the philosophical gap between me and my family had become a canyon. My parents viewed my career choice as a waste of my potential. "You could have been a surgeon making real money," my father would argue during family dinners. "The Richardson name belongs in prestigious hospitals, not animal clinics." My mother would add her signature, disapproving look. "Darling, no respectable man will take you seriously when you come home smelling like dog shampoo." Victoria, 3 years older and positioned as the golden daughter, had followed my father into real estate development. "At least one of us understands the importance of building wealth," she would say, while showing off her latest luxury purchase. "Maybe when you grow up, you'll realize that saving puppies doesn't pay for diamonds." But Grandpa William couldn't have been prouder. "You're healing innocent creatures," he'd say during our weekly phone calls. "That's the kind of legacy I want the Richardson name to represent." When I met David Chen at a charity fundraiser 2 years ago, the family divide grew even wider. David, a 30-year-old social worker, had grown up in a modest immigrant family, worked his way through college, and chose his profession because every child deserves someone in their corner, even when it doesn't pay much. His gentle brown eyes, infectious laugh, and unwavering commitment to helping others drew me in immediately. My family's reaction was predictably shallow. "A social worker is noble, I suppose," my mother said after our first family dinner together. "But hardly financially stable. What kind of future can he provide?" My father was more direct. "He drives a 10-year-old Toyota, Emma. What will our country club friends think?" Victoria didn't even pretend to be diplomatic. "He's sweet, but you could do so much better in our social circle. Marcus Wellington has been asking about you, and his family owns half the downtown real estate." But Grandpa William saw in David what I did. During Christmas dinner, while my parents were busy discussing their wine collection with guests, I found my grandfather and David deep in conversation by the fireplace. "That young man has integrity," William told me later that night. "He reminds me of your grandmother's father, someone who understands what really matters." As my relationship with David grew serious, Grandpa William's health began declining. At 82, his heart was weakening, and during visits I noticed him becoming more thoughtful, more intentional about our conversations. "Family isn't always blood, Emma," he told me during one of our last hiking trips, just 4 months before our wedding. "Sometimes it's the people who choose to love you for who you really are." 3 weeks later, he asked me to visit the cabin alone. There, in his wood-paneled study surrounded by nature photographs and fishing gear, he brought up his estate for the first time. "There are arrangements I need to make," he said, his voice weaker, but his eyes still sharp. "Things I need to protect before I'm gone." I tried to change the subject, uncomfortable discussing his mortality, but he was insistent. "I've watched how they treat you, Emma. I've seen how they treat David. I need you to trust me in the coming weeks. Can you promise me that?" I promised, though I didn't understand what he meant. Grandpa William passed peacefully in his sleep just 3 months before our wedding. The family gathered at his lawyer's office for the will reading, conducted by his longtime attorney, Margaret Foster. To everyone's surprise, the will seemed to divide his estate equally among me, my parents, and Victoria. "That's odd," I whispered to David during the reading. He always talked about donating to the animal shelter and environmental groups. David squeezed my hand. "Maybe there's more we don't know," he said quietly, his social worker instincts sensing something wasn't right. What we didn't realize was how dramatically my family's behavior would change after that reading, and how it would lead to the destruction of what should have been the happiest day of our lives. The transformation in my family's attitude toward David after the will reading was both sudden and suspicious. My mother, who had previously called him that charity worker, now referred to him as our future son-in-law with practiced warmth. My father began inviting David to golf games, and Victoria actually started liking his social media posts. "They're making an effort," David said optimistically as we drove home from Sunday dinner a week after the will reading. "Maybe your grandfather's death gave them perspective on what matters." I wasn't convinced. They've never tried before. Why start now? The answer became clear when my mother called the next day, announcing she had taken the liberty of booking the grand ballroom at the Riverside Country Club for our reception. "But Mom, we already put a deposit down on the Botanical Conservatory," I reminded her. "David and I want something natural and intimate." "Oh, darling," she replied with a dismissive laugh. "The conservatory is charming for a small gathering, but hardly appropriate for a Richardson wedding. Besides, the country club had a cancellation, and I've already paid the non-refundable deposit. Your father would be devastated if we didn't use the venue where he's been a member for 20 years. This was just the beginning. Over the next 2 months, every decision David and I had carefully made was systematically undermined. The simple, elegant invitations we had designed were accidentally never ordered. Instead, my mother commissioned ornate gold-embossed cards that cost 4 times as much. My appointment with a local seamstress who specialized in vintage-style dresses was forgotten by my mother, who had promised to drive me. Instead, she scheduled a private appointment at an exclusive bridal salon where she had already selected a ball gown with an enormous train, the opposite of the simple A-line dress I had wanted. Our carefully curated guest list of 100 was somehow misplaced, replaced by my parents' version that included over 250 people, many of whom I barely knew. Strangely, several of David's relatives and friends were missing from this new list. "It must have been an oversight," my mother insisted when I confronted her. "We'll make sure they're added right away." Somehow, the correct invitations never reached David's family. The farm-to-table catering company we had selected was informed that we had changed our minds. In their place, my father had contracted the most expensive caterer in the city, featuring imported delicacies that would make David's working-class parents uncomfortable about contributing to the wedding costs as they had offered. "Your father is covering everything now," my mother explained. "It's his gift to you both. David's parents shouldn't worry about a thing." What seemed like generosity was actually a power move, taking control away from us and diminishing David's family's role in our celebration. 2 weeks before the wedding, I stopped by my parents' house to drop off some paperwork and heard laughter coming from upstairs. Following the sound, I froze in the doorway of the guest room. There was Victoria wearing my wedding dress, twirling in front of the mirror while my mother applauded. "It looks better on you than it will on her," my mother was saying. "Maybe after the divorce, we can have it altered for your wedding to someone more suitable." They hadn't noticed me yet, so I stepped back into the hallway, my heart pounding. "How long do you think we'll have to pretend to like him?" Victoria asked. My mother's voice was cold. "Your father thinks 18 months is sufficient. Enough time for Emma to come to her senses, or for us to convince her that a man from his background will never truly fit into our world." "Did you see his mother's purse at the engagement dinner? Definitely from a discount store." Victoria laughed. "And those shoes." I was embarrassed for her. I slipped out of the house, called David in tears, and met him at our apartment. As I recounted what I'd overheard, his face grew serious. "I've been noticing things too," he admitted. Your father took me aside last week and spent the entire conversation talking about prenuptial agreements and how they can be adjusted if circumstances change. It felt like a threat. That night, as we talked through everything that had happened since William's death, a disturbing pattern emerged. My family wasn't just taking over our wedding, they were actively working to sabotage our relationship. Something doesn't add up about your grandfather's will either, David pointed out. He was specific about his wishes when we talked. He told me he had plans for the animal shelter and land conservation. You're right, I realized. And he mentioned setting up scholarships for veterinary students. None of that was in the will. Despite our growing suspicions, we were weeks away from the wedding with deposits paid and arrangements finalized. David, ever the voice of reason, suggested we proceed with the ceremony, but remain vigilant. If they're playing a long game, we need to be strategic too, he said, holding me close. Let's document everything. Your grandfather trusted you for a reason, Emma. Maybe we need to trust his plan, whatever it was. Little did we know just how cruel things would get before the truth would finally emerge. The morning of our wedding arrived with perfect summer weather and a growing knot of anxiety in my stomach. I had barely slept, haunted by dreams of my grandfather trying to tell me something I couldn't quite understand. My mother and Victoria arrived at the bridal suite in the country club at 8 a.m., bringing a hairstylist and makeup artist I had never met. But I already booked Sarah. I protested, referring to the natural-style artist whose work I had loved during my trial session. She called with a family emergency, my mother said dismissively. Fortunately, Vivian was available. She does all the society brides. 3 hours later, I barely recognized myself in the mirror. My hair had been teased into an elaborate updo that felt like a helmet, and my makeup was so heavy I felt like I was wearing a costume. Perfect for photographs, my mother insisted when she saw my dismay. Trust me, darling, I know what works for formal occasions. As the bridesmaids, mostly Victoria's friends whom she had insisted I include, arrived for champagne, I retreated to the bathroom with my phone to text David. His response was immediate and comforting. No matter what they do, by tonight you'll be my wife. That's all that matters. I love you. With renewed determination, I emerged from the bathroom to find Victoria rifling through my wedding folder. What are you doing? I asked, noticing my carefully written vows were missing. Just making sure everything's organized, she replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Oh, and I found this in one of the boxes from Grandpa's cabin that Dad brought home. She handed me a small velvet box. Inside was my grandmother's pearl necklace, something I had mentioned wanting to wear as my something borrowed. That's surprisingly thoughtful, I said cautiously. Victoria's smile widened. Well, it is your wedding day. Even I can be nice occasionally. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 p.m. At 3:30, as I was being laced into the enormous ball gown my mother had selected, my father knocked on the bridal suite door. Princess, I have wonderful news, he announced, looking unusually pleased with himself. We're going to announce it during the reception, but I wanted you to hear it first. Your mother and I are selling the mountain cabin. My heart sank. Grandpa's cabin? But that property has been in the family for generations. It's where he taught me about nature, where we had all our important talks. It's just a building, Emma, my father said firmly. The developer is offering well above market value, and they're going to build luxury vacation homes. It's what your grandfather would have wanted, maximizing the investment. It was so blatantly false that I couldn't form a response. William had fought against mountain development his entire life, even serving on the local conservation board to protect the wilderness. I need a moment alone, I managed to say, my voice shaking. Don't mess up your makeup, my mother called as I closed the bathroom door. Alone again, I fought back tears that would ruin the heavy cosmetics. Something about the pearl necklace Victoria had given me felt wrong. Examining it closely, I realized it was a fake. The original had a distinctive clasp with a small dent from when my grandmother had accidentally dropped it. This clasp was perfect. A knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. It was my cousin Jenny, the only family member I had insisted on including in the bridal party. Your vows, she whispered, handing me a folded paper. Victoria switched them. These are the real ones from your folder. What did she replace them with? Jenny grimaced. Pages from your old diary. The entries about your crush on that teacher from college. Before I could process this latest sabotage, it was time to line up for the ceremony. As I took my father's arm for the walk down the aisle, he leaned in and whispered, "Try to look happier. We have important clients watching." The ceremony itself passed in a blur. I focused entirely on David's face, his steady gaze cutting through the chaos, his gentle hands as we exchanged rings, his unwavering voice as he promised to stand by me through whatever came our way. If he was bothered by the ostentatious surroundings or the hundreds of strangers watching us, he never showed it. It was during the reception that things truly fell apart. I noticed immediately that David's parents, his sister, and his closest friends had been seated at tables in the far back corner, partially hidden behind decorative columns. My family and their social circle occupied the premium tables near the dance floor. The first sign of trouble came during the appetizer course, when I overheard a server tell David's mother that the vegetarian meal she had specifically requested was unavailable. "But we confirmed it multiple times," she said, looking embarrassed as others around her were served elaborate dishes. The server shrugged. "The order was changed yesterday. I can bring you a house salad." Then came the speeches. As maid of honor, Victoria took the microphone with a predatory smile. "For those who don't know me, I'm the sister who got the looks," she began, earning uncomfortable laughter. "Emma and I have always been different. While I was winning beauty contests, she was rescuing stray cats. While I was dating the football captain, she was organizing protests to save trees." What followed was 15 minutes of thinly veiled insults disguised as sisterly teasing, including several embarrassing childhood stories I had specifically asked her not to mention. "And now she's landed a social worker," Victoria concluded with a wink. "Not a lawyer or a doctor with private practice, but hey, at least he cares about people." To Emma and David, may your love of thrift stores and volunteer work bring you happiness in your modest little future. As she sat down to scattered applause, my father stood up, already visibly drunk from the premium whiskey he'd been consuming since before the ceremony. "When my Emma told us she was dating a professional, I had high hopes," he began, not bothering with any warm introduction. "I pictured country club dinners and charity galas. Then we met David, and well..." He chuckled, raising his glass. "At least he has a college degree." I felt David stiffen beside me as my father continued. "In all seriousness, the Chens may not be accustomed to our lifestyle, but we welcome them to the experience. Who knows, maybe some of our standards will influence them, and David will finally upgrade that Toyota." As forced laughter rippled through the room, I watched David's parents exchange hurt glances. His father, a hard-working mechanic who had sacrificed everything to put his children through college, stared down at his plate. I leaned over to David and whispered, "I'm so sorry." "Not your fault," he replied, his jaw tight. "But I'm starting to think your grandfather was trying to warn you about something bigger than wedding interference." During the awkward dinner that followed, I excused myself to use the restroom. Passing by the coat check, I noticed my father's suit jacket hanging on a hook. Acting on instinct, I checked the inside pocket and found a folded document. As I partially pulled it out, I saw the letterhead of my grandfather's law firm and fragments of what appeared to be a different will, torn but not completely destroyed. Before I could examine it further, I heard voices approaching and quickly pushed the paper back into the pocket. Hiding in a nearby alcove, I overheard my parents and sister in the hallway. "The prenup might be solid, but there are always ways around these things," my father was saying. "After seeing how pathetic his family is tonight, I'm more convinced than ever that he's after the Richardson money." "Did you see his mother's face during your speech?" Victoria laughed. "Like a deer in headlights. These people don't belong in our world." "Once the honeymoon is over, we'll start working on Emma," my mother added. A few months of subtle comments about their differences, some well-placed concerns about their compatibility. "She'll be filing for divorce within a year. And if not, there's always the real will to consider," my father muttered. "Margaret knows what to do if she doesn't come to her senses." Their voices faded as they returned to the reception. I stood frozen, pieces clicking into place. There was another will. My family knew about it, and somehow they had convinced Margaret Foster, my grandfather's trusted lawyer for 25 years, to participate in whatever scheme they were running. I rushed to find David, my elaborate dress catching on chairs as I moved through the crowded reception. He was standing alone near the gift table, watching the dance floor with a strained expression. "We need to leave," I said urgently.
Now.
"I'll explain everything, but we have to go." One look at my face told him everything he needed to know. Without hesitation, he nodded. "Lead the way." In the chaos of the reception, with guests drinking and dancing, no one noticed as the bride and groom slipped out the side door, leaving behind a celebration that had never truly been ours. David's Toyota, the same car my father had repeatedly mocked, waited in the country club parking lot, decorated with the traditional "just married" signs his sister had surprised us with. In any other circumstance, the sight would have made me smile. Now it represented escape. "The cabin," I said as David started the engine. "We need to go to Grandpa's cabin before they sell it." "Are you sure? What about our flight to Hawaii tomorrow?" "Trust me," I insisted, already working to remove the pins from my painful hairdo. "I think Grandpa left something there for us to find." As we drove through the gathering twilight toward the mountains, I explained everything. The torn will I'd glimpsed in my father's pocket, the conversation I'd overheard, and the growing suspicion that my family had somehow manipulated my grandfather's final wishes. "That would explain why the will reading seemed so out of character," David said, navigating the winding mountain road. "No specific donations, no conservation plans, just a simple four-way split." It didn't sound like William at all. The cabin stood silent and peaceful against the darkening sky, its log walls holding decades of memories. Using the key I'd kept since my grandfather's passing, we entered the familiar space that smelled of pine and old books. "We need to check his study," I said, kicking off the uncomfortable wedding shoes and hiking up my voluminous skirt. "That's where he kept everything important." William's study remained exactly as he'd left it. Nature photographs on the walls, shelves lined with books on wildlife and conservation, his old desk dominating the room. David and I began a methodical search, checking drawers, looking behind pictures, and scanning bookshelves for anything out of place. "What exactly are we looking for?" David asked after 40 minutes of fruitless searching. "I don't know," I admitted, frustration mounting. "A document, a letter, something that would explain what's really happening." I sank into my grandfather's leather chair, the absurdity of the situation hitting me. Here I was, still in my wedding dress, married for less than 6 hours, searching for hidden secrets instead of celebrating our union. He would have put it somewhere I would think to look, I reasoned aloud. Somewhere that had meaning to us both. My eyes fell on the nature photograph above the fireplace, William and me holding up a large trout from the summer I turned 18. It had been a particularly memorable catch because I had insisted on using a fly fishing technique he had just taught me, despite his gentle suggestion that a spinner might work better for that particular spot. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts, even when experienced people tell you otherwise, he had said when my unconventional approach proved successful. "That's the mark of real wisdom, Emma." I stood and walked to the photograph, lifting it carefully from the wall. Behind it was a small wall safe I had never seen before. "David," I called, my heart racing. "I need a combination." David joined me, examining the simple dial mechanism. "Any ideas?" I thought for a moment, then tried my birth date. Nothing. My grandmother's birthday. Still nothing. "What about the date you caught that fish?" David suggested, pointing to the photograph. I smiled at his perception. "July 23rd. The year I turned 18. I dialed July 23rd, 18, and the safe clicked open. Inside was a sealed envelope, a USB drive, and a legal document bearing the heading, "Last Will and Testament of William James Richardson." With trembling hands, I removed all 3 items and placed them on the desk. "You should read the letter first," David suggested, pulling up a chair beside me. The envelope was addressed simply to Emma in my grandfather's distinctive handwriting. Breaking the seal, I began to read aloud. My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, then you've likely discovered that things aren't as they seemed at the official reading of my will. I apologize for the deception, but after a lifetime of observing your parents' and sister's behavior, I knew I needed to take precautions. The document you found in the safe is my true will. The version Margaret Foster read to the family was part of a test, one that, sadly, I predicted your family would fail. Margaret has instructions to reveal the truth 6 weeks after your wedding, unless you contact her sooner using the phrase, "The eagle soars at dawn." I wanted to see how your family would behave when they believed they would receive equal shares of my estate. Would they finally accept David? Would they respect your wedding wishes? Would they show the character I've spent decades hoping they might develop? I suspect, since you're reading this before your honeymoon, that they've shown their true colors. The USB drive contains audio recordings of conversations I had with your father in the months before my passing. Conversations where he revealed plans to manipulate you and your inheritance once I was gone. Emma, I've watched you grow into a woman of principle and compassion. In David, you found a partner who shares those values. The two of you understand what true wealth is, and it has nothing to do with country clubs or luxury cars. The cabin is yours, as is the majority of my estate. I've established funds for the animal shelter, where you volunteer, and for the mountain conservation group. Your parents and Victoria will receive modest trusts, enough to prevent a successful contest of the will, but not enough to fund the lifestyle they believe they're entitled to. Trust Margaret Foster. Despite appearances, she has been following my instructions precisely. When you contact her, she will explain everything and begin the process of executing my true wishes. Remember our hiking trips, remember our talks, and know that I am so proud of the person you've become. David is the partner you deserve. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. All my love, Grandpa. Tears streamed down my face as I finished reading. David, his own eyes damp, squeezed my hand tightly. He knew, I whispered. He knew exactly what they would do. William was protecting you, David said softly. He was making sure you wouldn't be manipulated or controlled. We opened the will next, confirming everything the letter had described. The cabin and 70% of William's considerable estate were left to me. Substantial donations were directed to the animal shelter and conservation efforts. My parents and Victoria each received trusts that would provide modest annual incomes, comfortable, but far from luxurious. The USB drive contained audio recordings of several meetings between my grandfather and my father in the months before William's death. In one particularly damning clip, my father could be clearly heard discussing plans to guide Emma toward more suitable partners and ensure the Richardson fortune stays within appropriate circles once my grandfather was gone. We can use David's background against him, my father had said callously. No marriage is unbreakable if you have the right pressure points. My grandfather had simply listened, allowing my father to reveal his true character, while the hidden recorder captured everything. As the reality of the situation settled over us, David pulled me into his arms, my elaborate wedding dress crinkling between us. "What do you want to do now?" he asked, always respectful of my choices, even in crisis. I took a deep breath, sudden clarity washing over me. First, we're going on our honeymoon. We deserve that much. While we're in Hawaii, we'll contact Margaret Foster with a code phrase and set everything in motion. David smiled, that steady, warm smile that had first drawn me to him. That seems perfect somehow. They tried to ruin today, I said, determination replacing my earlier distress. But they don't get to ruin our marriage or our future. We spent that night at the cabin, sleeping in the guest room that had always been mine during visits. The next morning, still wearing yesterday's clothes, we drove to our apartment, quickly packed for our honeymoon, and headed to the airport, ignoring the dozens of missed calls and messages from my family. As our plane lifted off toward Hawaii, I felt a weight lifting too. Whatever confrontation awaited us upon our return, we would face it together, with the truth and my grandfather's wisdom firmly on our side. The transition from wedding disaster to tropical paradise was surreal. One day, I was fleeing my own reception in a massive ball gown. The next, I was walking barefoot on pristine white sand, the Pacific Ocean stretching endlessly before me in shades of blue and green. Our beachfront resort in Maui offered privacy and breathtaking beauty, the perfect setting to process everything that had happened and plan our next steps. On our first morning, as the sun rose over the calm waters, David and I sat on our private balcony with coffee, William's letter between us. The phrase is "the eagle soars at dawn." I reminded myself, reaching for my phone. I should call Margaret now while it's still business hours back home. David nodded supportively, taking my free hand as I dialed the number for Foster and Associates. After identifying myself to the receptionist, I was quickly connected to Margaret's private line. "Emma," she answered immediately, her voice a mixture of relief and concern. "I've been hoping you'd call. Are you safe? Your parents have been telling everyone you had some kind of breakdown at the reception."
I'm fine, Margaret.
"I'm with David in Hawaii." I took a deep breath. "The eagle soars at dawn." There was a moment of silence, then an audible sigh. "Thank goodness. William said you'd figure it out. Where did you find it?" "The cabin. Behind the trout fishing photo." "Yes, of course. That means you have the true will and the evidence." I've been maintaining the charade as William instructed, but it hasn't been easy. Your father has already begun inquiring about accelerated distribution of assets. This news, while shocking, only confirmed what we discovered. They're trying to sell the cabin, Margaret. My father announced it during our reception. "They can't sell what they don't own," Margaret assured me. The cabin was transferred into a conservation trust 6 months before William's passing. They've been speaking with a real estate developer who's actually working with me, another part of William's plan to see how far they would go. The intricate layers of my grandfather's foresight were remarkable. He had anticipated every move my family might make and prepared countermeasures for each one. "What happens now?" I asked. Margaret's voice took on a professional tone. "With your authorization, I'll begin executing the true will. The audio evidence will be crucial if your family contests, which I expect they will. I'll need you to document everything that happened with the wedding as well, all the instances of sabotage, the conversations you overheard, everything." "They'll say it's just normal family disagreements over wedding plans," David pointed out, leaning close to the phone. "How do we prove malicious intent?" "William thought of that too," Margaret replied. "Start contacting your original vendors, the ones your family canceled or changed. Get written statements about who contacted them and what was said. I've already been quietly gathering evidence of your parents' financial activities since William's death. They've been quite busy making plans for money they don't actually have." After arranging to send Margaret all necessary documentation securely, we ended the call with a plan in place. For the next 4 days, between swims in crystal-clear waters and dinners under the stars, David and I methodically documented everything we could remember about the wedding sabotage. The wedding planner we had initially hired confirmed via email that she had received a call from Patricia Richardson claiming I had changed my mind about the entire vision and would no longer require her services. The Botanical Conservatory manager forwarded an email from my father canceling our reservation, citing the bride's dissatisfaction with the rustic accommodations. The farm-to-table caterer sent a copy of the cancellation form signed by my mother using my name. Each piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of deliberate interference and deception. But it wasn't until the 5th day of our honeymoon that we discovered just how far my family's betrayal had gone. "Emma, you need to see this," David called from our room while I was reading on the balcony. His tone made me rush inside immediately. On his laptop screen was an email from his sister Lisa with an attachment, a social media post from Victoria. It showed a clearly manipulated photo of me looking distressed at the reception with the caption, "When the pressure of marrying beneath your station finally hits. Prayers for my sister as she gets the help she needs. #mental health, #family support." Accompanying the screenshot was a message from Lisa. "This is all over their social circles. Your in-laws are telling everyone you had a nervous breakdown and David manipulated you into eloping. They've been to your apartment building twice, trying to convince the manager to let them in for a welfare check." My hands trembled as I scrolled through more screenshots. My mother had posted a somber request for privacy during this difficult family time. My father had given a quote to the local society page claiming I had been under tremendous stress and that they were working with mental health professionals to ensure my well-being. They're trying to build a case that I'm mentally unstable. I realized, ice forming in my stomach. If they can convince people I'm not competent to make my own decisions, they could challenge your inheritance on grounds of mental capacity, David finished, his social work background making the strategy instantly clear to him. It's despicable, but clever. I called Margaret immediately, forwarding all the screenshots as we spoke. I was just about to contact you, she said grimly. They've escalated faster than even William anticipated. Your father came to my office yesterday with a psychiatric consultant, discussing options for an evaluation when you return. Can they force that? I asked, panic rising.
No, Margaret Sturme.
You're a competent adult with no history of mental illness. But they're building a narrative, and if they can get enough people to express concern about your behavior, they could make things very difficult, David concluded. Margaret cleared her throat. There's more. They've hired a private investigator to look into David's background. Your father specifically asked him to focus on financial irregularities and prior relationships. David's jaw tightened, but he remained calm. I have nothing to hide, but the invasion of privacy is unacceptable. I agree, Margaret said. Which is why I think we need to accelerate our timeline. I've prepared all necessary documentation to execute William's true will. With your permission, I'd like to move forward immediately rather than waiting for your return. We agreed, without hesitation. Before ending the call, Margaret added one final piece of advice. Document everything. Keep a journal of all communications from your family. Record phone calls if legally permitted. The more evidence we have of their behavior, the stronger our position will be. That night, as if on cue, the calls began. First, my mother, her voice tearful and concerned. Darling, we're so worried. Whatever you think we did, we can work through it as a family. Please come home and let us help you. Then my father, authoritative and commanding. This childish behavior ends now, Emma. You're a Richardson, and Richardsons don't air family disagreements in public. Return home immediately, or there will be consequences. Finally, Victoria, her message dripping with false sympathy. Sis, everyone understands the pressure got to you. No one's judging. Just ditch the social worker and come home. Daddy's already talking to divorce attorneys who can keep this all quiet. I recorded each call, maintaining calm, non-committal responses that revealed nothing of our plans. After the third call, David suggested we extend our stay in Hawaii for a few extra days, giving Margaret more time to execute the will and prepare for the inevitable confrontation. The resort has availability, he noted, and we're safer here, away from their influence and potential manipulations. I agreed, grateful once again for his steady presence and clear thinking. We contacted the airline to change our return flight and settled in for an extended stay in paradise, though one now tinged with strategic planning and legal preparations. Over the next 4 days, Margaret worked tirelessly back home, sending daily encrypted updates on her progress. The true will had been officially filed with the probate court. The preliminary will had been withdrawn with a formal explanation of its purpose as a test of character. The audio evidence had been secured with multiple authenticated copies. Meanwhile, my family grew increasingly desperate in their communications. We've spoken with Dr. Harrison about residential treatment options. My mother texted. Very discreet, very comfortable. We can handle all the arrangements. David's background check raised several red flags. My father claimed in a voicemail, not specifying any actual findings. We're only trying to protect you from a serious mistake. Your mental health clause for the prenup is already being prepared, Victoria wrote, revealing their assumption that they could invalidate my marriage contract. No one will ever know about this episode. Each message, each call, each text became another piece of evidence documenting their true intentions. What they didn't realize was that while they were building a false narrative about my mental state, they were simultaneously creating a perfect record of their own manipulation and deception. On our final night in Hawaii, David and I sat on our balcony under a canopy of stars, the gentle sound of waves providing a peaceful backdrop to our conversation. "Are you ready for what comes next?" David asked, his fingers intertwined with mine. I considered the question carefully. I'm sad that it has to be this way. They're still my family, despite everything. But I'm ready for the truth to come out. I'm ready to honor Grandpa's wishes and start our life together without their interference. David nodded thoughtfully. Your grandfather saw this coming long before we did. He tried to give them chances to change, to see beyond money and status. And they failed every test, I concluded. Now they have to face the consequences. As the tropical night enveloped us in its warm embrace, I felt a strange mixture of grief and determination. The family I had grown up with had revealed themselves to be people I couldn't trust or respect. Yet through that painful revelation, my bond with David had only strengthened, and my connection to my grandfather's legacy had deepened. Tomorrow we fly home, I said, resting my head on David's shoulder. And we end this on our terms. On William's terms, David corrected gently. He's still looking out for you even now. The thought brought tears to my eyes, not of sadness, but of gratitude for the true family bonds that transcended even death. Whatever confrontation awaited us back home, we would face it with the strength of those bonds guiding us forward. Our return flight landed on a crisp autumn afternoon, the seasonal change during our extended honeymoon mirroring the transformation in our own lives. Margaret Foster was waiting at the arrival gate, her familiar figure a welcome sight amid the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Welcome home. She greeted us warmly, helping with our luggage. Everything is in place for tomorrow's meeting. Your family believes it's about accelerating the distribution of assets from the preliminary will. They have no idea what's actually coming. The three of us drove directly to Margaret's office, where we spent hours reviewing documents, practicing responses to potential arguments, and finalizing our strategy. Margaret had reserved a conference room at her firm for the family meeting, selecting neutral territory where we would have home field advantage. Get some rest tonight, she advised as we concluded our preparations. Tomorrow will be emotionally challenging, but legally we're on solid ground. David and I checked into a hotel rather than returning to our apartment, uncertain whether my family might be monitoring our home. That night, despite the comfortable surroundings, sleep came fitfully as my mind rehearsed various scenarios for the confrontation ahead. Morning arrived with a clarity that comes from absolute certainty. As I dressed in a professional charcoal suit, worlds away from the ornate wedding gown I'd last worn in my family's presence, I felt my grandfather's strength flowing through me. We arrived at Foster and Associates 30 minutes before the scheduled meeting time. Margaret had arranged the conference room strategically, a large rectangular table with David and me positioned beside her at the head, facing the door. A projection screen was set up behind us, its contents hidden until the right moment. In an adjacent room, 2 court reporters and a videographer waited, ready to document everything. Your family just arrived in the lobby, Margaret's assistant informed us at precisely 10 a.m. Shall I send them up? Margaret nodded, her expression professional but determined. It's time. The door opened moments later, revealing my parents and sister, all impeccably dressed and wearing expressions of concerned superiority that faltered momentarily when they saw me sitting calmly beside David. Emma, my mother rushed forward, arms outstretched. We've been so worried. Please take your seats, Margaret interrupted smoothly. We have a great deal to discuss, and I've scheduled exactly 2 hours for this meeting. My father's eyes narrowed suspiciously. What is the meaning of this setup, Margaret? I thought we were here to discuss accelerating the asset distribution. In a manner of speaking, we are, Margaret replied, gesturing again to the chairs across from us. Please sit down so we can begin. Once they were seated, looking increasingly wary, Margaret opened a folder and removed a document. Before we proceed, I need to inform you that this meeting is being recorded with video and stenography, as is standard for matters of significant estate execution. She gestured toward the discrete cameras in the corners of the room. Do I have everyone's acknowledgement and consent to this recording? My family exchanged glances before my father reluctantly agreed for all of them. I noted the momentary flash of worry in his eyes, the first crack in his confident facade. Excellent, Margaret continued. Now to business. I've called this meeting to execute the final will and testament of William James Richardson. We've already done that, Victoria interjected impatiently. 3 months ago. That's why we're here, to speed up the distribution. Margaret smiled thinly. I'm afraid what we reviewed 3 months ago was not William's final will, but rather a preliminary document designed specifically as what Mr. Richardson called a test of character. She slid copies of the true will across the table. This is William Richardson's actual final will and testament, properly executed and witnessed 6 months before his passing. My father snatched up the document, his face darkening as he scanned its contents. My mother peered over his shoulder, her perfectly maintained composure beginning to slip. Victoria grabbed her own copy, flipping pages frantically. This is preposterous, my father finally sputtered. This can't be legal. We'll contest it immediately. You're welcome to try, Margaret replied calmly. But I should inform you that William anticipated that response. Perhaps this will clarify his intentions. She pressed a button on a remote control, and the projection screen behind us illuminated with my grandfather's face. The video began to play. Robert, Patricia, Victoria. My grandfather's voice filled the room, strong despite his evident physical weakness. If you're watching this, then you failed the test I set for you. The preliminary will you heard after my passing was designed to reveal your true characters, to see if the prospect of equal inheritance would finally inspire you to treat Emma and her chosen partner with the respect they deserve. My father half rose from his seat, but Margaret raised a hand, silencing him as the recording continued. Emma has demonstrated the values I tried to instill in all of you: integrity, compassion, and the understanding that true wealth isn't measured in dollars. David Chen possesses those same qualities, which is why I welcomed him into our family when you would not. The recording continued with my grandfather methodically outlining his observations of my family's materialistic values over the years, their dismissal of my choices, and their transparent attempts to control my life for their own benefit. The true will you now hold reflects my actual wishes, he concluded. Emma will inherit the cabin property and 70% of my estate. The animal shelter and conservation groups will receive substantial donations, and you 3 will receive modest trusts that will provide comfort without excess, perhaps giving you the opportunity to develop the character you've thus far failed to demonstrate. As the video ended, silence filled the room. My mother was the first to recover, turning to me with tears that I couldn't determine were manipulative or genuine. Emma, darling, you can't possibly want this. We're your family. Whatever disagreements we've had about the wedding. This isn't about the wedding, I interrupted, finding my voice. Although what you did there was merely the culmination of a lifetime of similar behavior. I opened a folder of my own, removing printed emails, text messages, and vendor statements. You systematically sabotaged every aspect of our wedding day. You canceled our chosen venue. I placed the conservatory email on the table. You replaced our caterer. Another document joined the first. You deliberately excluded David's family from meaningful participation. With each piece of evidence I presented, my family's expressions shifted from indignant denial to calculating assessment of their position. Typical bride drama, Victoria attempted, her tone dismissive. Every bride thinks someone sabotaged her wedding. Perhaps, Margaret interjected, but not every bride has vendors willing to sign affidavits about who actually made the changes. She added a stack of notarized statements to the growing pile of evidence, or recordings of family members discussing their intentions. She played a brief audio clip, my mother and Victoria talking about the wedding dress, the conversation I had overheard at my parents' house. You were spying on us? My mother gasped, genuinely shocked. No. I happened to overhear you plotting against me, I corrected. There's a difference. My father, ever the strategist, changed tactics. This is all very dramatic, but ultimately irrelevant. Family disagreements about wedding plans don't invalidate William's original will. True, Margaret acknowledged, but this might. She played another audio clip, this one showing my father in my grandfather's study approximately 2 months before William's death. Once you're gone, we'll need to guide Emma toward more appropriate choices, my father was saying. The Chun boy is a phase. Once she has access to her full inheritance, we can introduce her to men of actual substance. My grandfather's voice, weak but clear. And if she's happy with David? Happiness is temporary. Status and connections are permanent. Trust me, there are ways to ensure the Richardson fortune stays where it belongs. As the clip ended, my father's face had gone pale. Where did you get that? You were recording private conversations. That's illegal. William recorded those conversations with full legal disclosure, Margaret countered smoothly. The device was visible, and the room contained posted notice of recording, a security measure he had implemented years ago after several valuable items disappeared during family gatherings. You simply never bothered to notice. She turned to the stack of evidence before us. We also have documentation of your attempts to build a false narrative about Emma's mental health following the wedding, your unauthorized visits to their apartment building, and your consultation with psychiatric professionals about having her evaluated against her will. My mother, desperately trying to salvage the situation, turned to David. Surely you can see this is tearing the family apart. As a social worker, don't you want what's best for Emma? A resolution that keeps everyone whole. David, who had remained deliberately silent until now, spoke with quiet authority. What's best for Emma is exactly what William wanted, freedom from manipulation and control. As her husband, I support her completely in this. As a social worker, I recognize emotional abuse when I see it. Emotional abuse. Victoria scoffed. Now we're abusive because we wanted a nice wedding? Because we have standards? No, I said firmly. You're abusive because you've spent years undermining my choices, dismissing my values, and attempting to mold me into a version of myself that prioritizes appearance over substance, just as you did with my wedding. At that moment, the conference room door opened, and Margaret's assistant ushered in 3 people I recognized instantly: the manager of the Botanical Conservatory, the owner of the farm-to-table catering company, and our original wedding planner. These individuals have provided written statements, Margaret explained, but they're also prepared to testify in person about the specific instructions they received from each of you, instructions that directly contradicted Emma and David's expressed wishes for their wedding day. My father, recognizing the mounting evidence against them, switched to his final negotiating position. What will it take to end this amicably? Name a figure. The crude attempt at financial settlement, treating the situation like a business deal to be closed, confirmed everything my grandfather had observed about them. This isn't a negotiation, I said, my voice steady despite the emotion behind it. This is simply the consequence of choices you've made consistently over many years. Grandpa gave you multiple opportunities to demonstrate better character, and you failed each test. I stood up, David rising beside me. The will is legal and binding. Margaret will handle all further communications regarding the estate. Any contest will only result in the public disclosure of all this evidence, something I don't think any of you want. My sister, her composure finally breaking, slammed her hand on the table. This is so typical. Perfect Emma, Grandpa's favorite, getting everything while the rest of us are treated like villains in some soap opera. Her outburst seemed to trigger something in my mother, who turned to her sharply. Be quiet, Victoria. Your constant antagonism toward your sister is part of what got us here. If you hadn't insisted on that ridiculous maid of honor speech. You told me to do that. Victoria shot back. You said it would be a reality check that would put her in her place. I never said to humiliate her in front of hundreds of people. And it was your idea to try on her wedding dress. Enough. My father's voice cut through their escalating argument. He turned to me, his expression hard but defeated. You've made your point, Emma. We underestimated you, and William. He stood abruptly. Come, Patricia, Victoria. Our attorneys will be in touch, Margaret. As they gathered their belongings, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and liberation watching the family I had grown up with preparing to exit my life, at least in the controlling, omnipresent way they had always inhabited it. At the door, my father paused, turning back with one final attempt. The cabin has been in the Richardson family for generations. Regardless of legal ownership, it's part of our shared heritage. I hope you'll consider that before making any decisions about its future. I met his gaze steadily. I will honor the property and its history the way Grandpa did, by protecting it from development and preserving it for future generations who value more than just its monetary worth. With that, they departed, leaving behind the heavy silence that follows significant endings and precedes new beginnings. Margaret looked between David and me. You did well, both of you. William would be proud. As we gathered our documentation and prepared to leave, I felt the weight of the confrontation lifting. Whatever legal challenges might still lie ahead, the truth had finally been spoken aloud, and there was no returning to the old patterns of manipulation and control. Outside Margaret's office building, David and I stood in the autumn sunshine, facing each other in the first quiet moment we'd had since the meeting began. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. I considered the question carefully, searching my feelings. "Yes," I finally answered. Not happy about how things turned out with my family, but at peace with standing up for the truth for us. David smiled, that steady, reassuring smile that had been my anchor throughout everything. "Then let's go home, our home, and start building the life your grandfather believed in." Hand in hand, we walked toward our future, leaving behind the wreckage of old expectations and embracing the freedom to define family on our own terms. 6 months later, David and I were living in the mountain cabin full-time. The legal battles had ended quickly when my family's lawyers saw the evidence against them. They accepted the modest trusts from the real will without further contest. Our life was everything Grandpa William had envisioned. David's social work program was thriving with funding from the estate, helping families throughout the region. I'd established a wildlife foundation that protected the mountain ecosystems he'd loved. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, I received an unexpected text from Victoria. "I've been thinking a lot lately. Maybe you were right about some things. I miss who I used to be before all the social climbing. Would you be open to coffee sometime?" I showed David the message. "What do you think?" "Your choice," he said gently. "But people can change if they really want to." I smiled, remembering Grandpa's words about second chances. Maybe there was hope for my sister after all. As fireflies began dancing in the trees, I reflected on the journey that brought us here. The pain of my family's betrayal had given way to something beautiful, a life built on authenticity, love, and the values my grandfather had instilled in me. "Grandpa would be proud," I whispered to David. "He is proud," David replied, squeezing my hand. "And so am I." Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well, on your own terms, with people who truly love and respect you. From our tropical paradise revelation to this peaceful mountain evening, we had proven that real family isn't about blood or money. It's about choosing to stand by each other when it matters most. What about you? Have you ever had to choose between family expectations and your own happiness? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding your authentic path in life.